Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to tackle a common misconception that people often repeat, the idea that the Bible is just a 2,000-year-old book. This phrase pops up all the time, but is it really accurate? Spoiler alert, it's not. Stick around as we dive into the timeline, the origins, and the lasting impact of this influential text. If you're ready to see things differently, let's get started. Did you know that the Bible you hold today isn't just an ancient, unchanging relic from 2,000 years ago? In fact, it's not even a single book. We often think of it as something that dropped from the heavens, fully formed, but the truth is way more complex and honestly, much more fascinating. The Bible is actually a collection of stories, poems, laws, and prophecies spanning thousands of years. Some of these writings date back not just 2,000 years, but possibly 3,500 years or more. It's not just a historical text, it's a compilation that evolved over time, reflecting different cultures, rulers, and agendas. Take the Old Testament, for example. These texts weren't written in one sitting by a single author. No, they were crafted by multiple hands over centuries, starting around 1500 BC and maybe even earlier. Imagine the timeline. This was long before Jesus, long before the Christian church, and long before the world as we know it today. And here's something even more interesting. Some of these writings weren't originally Hebrew. They share surprising similarities with older stories from other cultures, like the Babylonians. You've probably heard of the flood story, right? Well, there's more to that tale than meets the eye. Did you know there's a story almost identical to Noah's Ark in the Epic of Gilgamesh? This Sumerian tale dates back to around 2100 BC way before the Bible was written. But wait, there's more. The Bible, as we know it today, is actually the result of human decisions. People had to choose which books made the cut and which didn't. Not every ancient text was included. Early church leaders held councils, like the famous Council of Nicaea, in 325 AD, where they debated which books would be considered sacred. Yes, people argued over this stuff, and that's just one example. For centuries, different sects of Christianity and Judaism had their own collections of scriptures. Ever heard of the Apocrypha? These are books that many Protestant versions of the Bible don't include, but the Catholic Bible does. We're talking about entire books that some Christians consider sacred, while others see them as irrelevant. So, is the Bible really 2,000 years old? Well, that depends on which Bible you're talking about. And let's not forget about translations. The Bible wasn't originally written in English, Latin, or even Greek. The Old Testament, or Hebrew Bible, was originally written in, you guessed it, Hebrew. The Bible was primarily written in Hebrew, at least the Old Testament. The New Testament? Mostly Greek. But here's where it gets interesting. Translating these ancient texts into modern languages has introduced layers of interpretation, and yes, even errors. Take the word Alma, Hebrew for young woman. It was famously translated into Greek as Parthenos, meaning virgin. This one translation mistake played a massive role in shaping the doctrine of the virgin birth of Jesus, a concept that wasn't even in the original Hebrew text. That's not just a simple error, it sparked an entirely new theological direction, all from a single word. So, no, the Bible you're familiar with isn't some untouchable, monolithic text frozen in time for 2,000 years. It's a living document shaped by history, politics, and culture over millennia. And here's the mind-blowing part. We're still discovering more ancient texts that could change how we understand it. Take the Dead Sea Scrolls, found in the 20th century. They contain scriptures that are older than some versions of the Bible we have today. When people read the Bible, they're often unaware that the version they're holding is far from the original. It's been translated over and over again, and with every translation, something gets lost, added, or changed. And those changes? They've shaped the beliefs of billions over millennia. Let's dive into one of the most impactful translation decisions in history. The Hebrew word Alma simply means young woman. But when the Bible was translated into Greek in the 3rd century BC, known as the Septuagint, Alma became Parthenos, meaning virgin. This one-word swap had profound consequences. It led to the belief in the virgin birth of Jesus, a doctrine that became central to Christian faith. Here's the thing. There's no evidence the original Hebrew text was saying Mary was a virgin. It just described her as a young woman. But that mistranslation cemented a major theological point that shaped Christianity forever. And that's just one example. Translation issues like this aren't rare. They're all over the Bible. Take the 10 Commandments, for instance. Most people know the phrase, "Thou shalt not kill." But the Hebrew word ratzak is more accurately translated as murder, not just kill. The distinction matters, and it's another case where a translation choice has influenced how people understand core teachings. The Hebrew word ratzak means murder, not just kill, so the original intent was likely to prohibit murder specifically, not killing in general. That's an important distinction, right? Yet for centuries, people have interpreted this as a blanket ban on all killing, influencing everything from pacifist movements to legal interpretations. Then there's the word Sheol, which appears repeatedly in the Hebrew Bible. In the original text, it refers to a shadowy, neutral place where all the dead go, nothing like the fiery pits of hell we often hear about. But when translated into Greek, Hades was used, and later English translations often rendered it as hell. That's a massive leap in meaning. Suddenly, the ancient Hebrew concept of the afterlife was transformed into the Christian vision of hell, a place of eternal punishment. Just one word shift altered how entire civilizations understood life after death. But it's not just individual words. Entire passages are affected too. Ever heard the phrase, "God helps those who help themselves"? Many people think that's straight from the Bible. Spoiler alert, it's not. This phrase was popularized by Benjamin Franklin in Poor Richard's Almanac in 1757. Yet over time, this saying has been mistakenly attributed to Scripture, highlighting how easily interpretations can shift over the years. It's fascinating how the phrase "God helps those who help themselves" has become so deeply associated with biblical teachings that many treat it as Scripture, shaping the way people understand faith and personal responsibility. This is a perfect example of how easily meanings can get mixed up when we lose track of the original context. These aren't just trivial mistakes. They're pivotal moments in religious history, often driven by human error or sometimes even intentional choices. Every translation comes with its own biases, assumptions, and contexts that shape the final text. Given that the Bible has been translated into over 3,000 languages, you can bet countless other changes have slipped in along the way, each one subtly tweaking the meaning, theology, and beliefs attached to these ancient words. The problem isn't that people read the Bible in translation. It's that many readers are unaware that what they're reading has been filtered through centuries of linguistic, cultural, and even political decisions. Words have immense power, and in the case of the Bible, a single mistranslation can resonate throughout history, influencing everything from church doctrines to personal faith. So, let's explore where all of this starts. Things are getting really interesting. The Bible, the one sitting on bookshelves around the world, isn't just a spiritual guide. It's also a political document shaped by centuries of debate, compromise, and yes, outright exclusion. It was created in a world where power and theology were tightly intertwined. In the early days of Christianity, there wasn't just one version of the faith. It was chaotic. Different Christian groups believed radically different things. Some saw Jesus as purely divine, while others thought of him as more human. That wasn't a minor detail. It shaped how they interpreted everything, including the Scriptures. In a world where these theological debates were tearing communities apart, early church leaders realized they needed to establish some order. So, what did they do? They held councils, like the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, where they began deciding which books should be included in the Bible, and just as importantly, which ones shouldn't. Consider the Gospel of Thomas or the Gospel of Mary. These texts weren't rejected because they were deemed untrue, but because they didn't fit the narrative the early church wanted to promote. These writings challenged the growing orthodoxy and suggested ideas that directly contradicted what the established leaders were pushing. Now think about the power behind that decision. Imagine having control over the sacred texts that define an entire religion by choosing which books are considered inspired and which are not. The early church wasn't just defining faith, they were defining power. The Roman Empire, under Constantine, saw this as the perfect opportunity to unify its people under one religious framework. What better way to solidify control over an empire than to control the religion that would shape its values and culture? But it didn't stop there. After Constantine, other rulers followed suit, each adding their own twist to the narrative. Whole councils were convened just to decide which gospels were deemed worthy. These weren't quick meetings. We're talking about hundreds of years filled with political maneuvering, heated arguments, and sometimes outright warfare over what should be considered holy. Take the Council of Nicaea, for example. Let's talk about Carthage in 397 AD, a pivotal moment where decisions were made that would impact billions of believers, none of whom had a say in which texts they would follow. And here's where it gets even crazier. Some books didn't just get excluded, they were outright banned. Ever heard of the Gospel of Judas? This text paints a very different picture of the infamous betrayer of Christ. Instead of being the ultimate villain, Judas is portrayed as someone who was following divine orders. That didn't sit well with the Orthodox narrative, so it got tossed aside, suppressed, and hidden away. We need to understand this process clearly. The Bible isn't just the product of divine inspiration, it's also the result of human selection, shaped by men in power and influenced by the politics of their time. Every book that was included or excluded reflects not just spiritual decisions, but also political calculations. This wasn't a neutral process. Let's talk about those hands with very human agendas. The Bible didn't just drop from the sky. It was constructed piece by piece over centuries of debates, councils, and power struggles. Now, here's a fact that's going to shake things up. Many of the stories in the Bible aren't original. Some of the most famous tales we know today, creation, the flood, even divine battles, are actually much older than the Bible itself. The Bible didn't just appear out of a vacuum. It's part of a much larger historical and cultural conversation. Let's start with the creation story we all know from Genesis. God creates the world in 6 days, and Adam and Eve are placed in the Garden of Eden. But what if I told you a very similar story existed long before the Hebrews even began writing? We're talking about the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation myth written down around 1800 BC. In this ancient text, the world is formed from chaos, and humans are created by the gods to serve them. Sound familiar? And this borrowing doesn't stop with creation. Take the Great Flood in Genesis, for example. In the biblical account, God floods the earth to wipe out humanity's wickedness, sparing only Noah and his family. But over 1,000 years earlier, the Sumerians had already penned a tale of a catastrophic flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In that story, the flood hero, Utnapishtim, builds a large boat, gathers animals, and survives a flood sent by the gods. The parallels between these two accounts are so striking that they can't be ignored. So, what does this mean? It means that the flood story wasn't unique to the Bible. It was part of a much older tradition, adapted and reinterpreted by the Hebrew writers. The Bible wasn't written in isolation. The ancient world was a melting pot of myths, ideas, and stories. As the Hebrew people came into contact with neighboring cultures like the Babylonians, Egyptians, and Sumerians, they absorbed some of those narratives into their own traditions. This doesn't mean the Bible is false. Rather, it shows that its stories reflect a broader ancient worldview, a worldview that was shared across cultures and time. Let's dive into the theme of divine warfare, a powerful and recurring motif in the Bible. Take the book of Exodus, for example. It tells the dramatic story of a showdown between Yahweh and the gods of Egypt during the plagues. But if we look to ancient Canaanite mythology, we find a similar tale of Baal, a storm god, who battles and defeats the sea god Yam. This concept of divine beings clashing for control over the earth isn't unique to the Bible. It's a theme that resonates throughout the ancient Near East, from the Canaanites to the Babylonians. The Bible is filled with these ancient echoes, older myths reworked to fit the growing narrative of a monotheistic faith. When you read the Bible, you're not just engaging with a religious text, you're exploring a reflection of the ancient world and its interconnected cultures. Here's a question that doesn't get asked often enough. Why are some books included in the Bible while others are left out? What makes one book holy and another not? You might think the reasons are clear-cut, but it turns out the reality is a lot messier than that. Some of the most intriguing texts didn't make the cut, not because they were unimportant, but because they challenged the narratives that the early church wanted to promote. So, let's dive into this fascinating world of excluded texts and the stories they tell. Let's unravel the story of the Apocrypha, those mysterious books you've probably never read, but that some Christian denominations still hold as scripture. These texts include the Book of Tobit, the books of Maccabees, and Judith. You'll find them in the Catholic and Orthodox Bibles, but many Protestants don't recognize them. Why is that? During the Reformation, Martin Luther and his fellow reformers decided that these books didn't align with their theological views, dubbing them apocryphal, meaning hidden or spurious. It's fascinating to note that these texts were included in early Christian Bibles for centuries. But it doesn't stop there. Entire Gospels were left out as well. Take the Gospel of Thomas, for instance. This Gospel is packed with teachings attributed to Jesus, but skips over the miracles and resurrection. Instead, it emphasizes secret wisdom and mysticism, which didn't fit the mainstream narrative the church was shaping. Then there's the Gospel of Mary, which gives Mary Magdalene a far more prominent role than the traditional Gospels ever did. In her Gospel, she's portrayed as one of Jesus' closest disciples, someone with profound spiritual insight. These excluded texts open up a whole new perspective on early Christianity, challenging the narratives we've come to accept. This authority didn't sit well with the early male-dominated church leadership. So, what happened? These texts were sidelined, buried in the sands of history. Here's the twist. These texts were never truly lost. The early church was well aware of them and actively debated their validity. In fact, for a time, many of these books were read and revered by Christians across different regions. But as the church consolidated its power, it became clear that a single version of Christianity needed to prevail, a version that had no room for multiple interpretations or alternative voices. One of the most dramatic moments in this exclusion story occurred in the 4th century. Athanasius, a powerful bishop, penned a letter known as the Festal Letter of 367 AD, which outlined what he believed should be the only books in the Bible. His list excluded several texts that had been widely circulated among early Christian communities. This letter was incredibly influential in shaping the New Testament as we know it today. Essentially, Athanasius helped lock down the canon, ensuring that books like the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Mary would not make the final cut. Welcome to Blessovia Science TV, where we take you on an exhilarating journey through the cosmos and unravel the mysteries of science. We are excited to offer you the opportunity to become a valued member of our ever-growing community of cosmic enthusiasts and knowledge seekers. Exclusive access to cosmic content. As a member of Blessovia Science TV, you will gain exclusive access to a treasure trove of cosmic content, including documentaries, interviews with leading scientists, space missions updates, and awe-inspiring visualizations of the universe, live Q, and sessions with experts. Your membership will grant you the chance to participate in live Q and sessions with renowned scientists, astronomers, and space explorers. Get your burning questions answered by those who push the boundaries of human knowledge. Embark on a journey that spans the cosmos and join us in unraveling the secrets of the universe. Become a Blessovia Science TV member today, and together we will reach for the stars. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, and share. Don't forget to leave your comment.